Hello class, in this series of tutorials I'd like to build a new website for you. This is going to be like a portfolio site for me. It's going to be pretty simple, but I think it'll look pretty good. I'm going to bring in some graphics from Photoshop, and I wanted to sort of start with just a breakdown of the skeleton of what it's going to look like. So here it is right here. I'll show you how I built it, and then what I'll do is then begin adding some graphics to it in the tutorials that you'll watch as part of this series. So first off, I started with the layout that you are familiar with. It can be found on the W3 Schools website under CSS, and then the CSS website layout. I scroll down, look for, we will create a 3-column layout and change it to a 1-column layout on smaller screens. So I used this code, and that's just like in the previous tutorials, but I took out 2 of the columns because I really don't want text on my home page. You know, I might bring this in on the other pages, but I'm just concerned about the home page design right now. I'm going to use one large image, like a stock photo that I downloaded. So that is the setup for the layout, and I'm sort of taking a different approach with this tutorial. I'm going to give you the site, and then you can look at the code yourself, as opposed to trying to write and copy paste into brackets as I'm doing it. Probably be easier for you to do it, look at it this way. So here's the start of it, and again you can see the code. I'll show it to you in just a second here in brackets. And then here's the try it editor, so you want to use that to get the exact code if you want. Also, don't forget that pretty much anything I am designing I will create a separate style sheet for. So even though you see the CSS here in the HTML in the style tag, I took that and I put that in the separate .css style sheet. Okay, so that is where the code comes from. Now the other thing that I said, well, when I'm looking at this site is I want a different menu. I'm really not crazy about that menu bar we've been using. It's alright when you're learning, but it can be an outdated look, I think, if you're using a large menu bar across. A lot of times you'll see menus that look more like this here on the right hand side, just really simple, but I wanted it to be responsive. So when you take your screen and you drag it down, you can see that the menu gets replaced with a little icon right here, and then it gives you a little pop-up. It's pretty typical of what you see for responsive menus, but I wanted it to be the simplest possible responsive menu that I could find. So when I searched for it, this is the one that came up, and you don't need to go to this site and get the code because you can get it from me and my site. It's one that you can just download, but it's pretty simple. Does not take a lot of code to put in there, and that's what it looks like as well. Okay, and now 2 other things here. Actually, just one other thing. Here is the site. I'll give you the link to this, but what I'll do is I'll put a couple different versions of this site up, and then that way all you have to do, depending on the browser you're on, you can right click, like I'm on Firefox here, and you can view page source. That way you can get the code yourself if you want to look at this. So I'm going to do this in different stages. So what is up here live right now is what you're seeing, and then I'll replace this URL, probably just take off draft and get another one up there for you, and that'll be the completed version where I'm putting in the graphics for the home page. And then that'll be a separate tutorial for the graphics, and then I might do one more that'll talk about creating content for your pages. So I'll give you the setup here for or the topic. What I'm doing here is I'm going to create a portfolio site. I'm not going to finish it or anything. This is just for demonstration purposes, but I want it to be something that is simple and effectively shows my work. It's going to be geared towards instructional design because that's primarily my background, that and graphic and web design and video editing. But I'm just going to make it an instructional design portfolio, and it has these links here: the portfolio, the resume, about, and contact. And obviously I'm most concerned about the homepage design for this series of tutorials because that's what they're going to see first, and then it gives you the first impression. You want to have some graphics on there as well. So that's really the setup for what we're doing here. So if you wanted to follow along and do this, you could use a similar layout and create any kind of site that you want. Obviously it doesn't have to be a portfolio site. And a couple things about the design here. Again, I like this layout because of the responsive aspect, and also it gives me some areas where I can put in the graphics. So right here I've got an area where I can put in a header that I'll design in Photoshop, maybe a logo or title or something. And then instead of this text here, I really don't need text on my home page. The other pages, that's what that's for. I'm just going to do an image. I might put some text on my image that kind of shows a little better what I do with instructional design. But in general, that's all I'm going to need on my home page. So let's take a look at the folder structure and then also the code a little bit here, and then I'll wrap up this tutorial. And then in the second tutorial, what I will do for part 2 is I will add in the header image. I'll create that in Photoshop, and then I'll also create the main image that I want to replace this text right here. So I have a new folder called Portfolio. Inside that I have the index.html file that I just showed you. I also have the styles.css. And then I have two other folders. The images folder, there's one thing in there right now. You do have to have a little icon image for that, it looks like that. It's for the responsive menu that you saw on smaller screens. And then I also, as I'm building sites that have some graphics, I do like to keep an original images folder. That would contain images that you are not going to upload or that are not going to be integrated into your site. They would be like, for example, when you open up a new file in Photoshop, you might save it as a .psd file, and then you would save that in your original images folder, and then when you're done and you're ready to put that into your website, you would export it as a web format, like a GIF or a JPEG, and then that would go into your images folder. So you keep all those original images. Same thing with like stock photography. You generally don't want to download and put stock photography directly in your site without first optimizing it, resizing it, maybe editing in Photoshop. So you download the original image, then you save the exported version into your images so that it's ready for the site. So that's my setup for the folder. And then here are my files in brackets. So again, I would recommend that you just check out the code if you want to see what I'm doing here. A lot of it is similar to the last site that we did, and there's not much HTML code. That's what I like about this particular design. There's more CSS in this when we get into that file, but you'll see kind of the same stuff here. You'll see the doc type and the head and all of that, and the character set and the viewport at the top. Here's the link to the style sheet. Here's my division tag layout. I'm using the class tag with the header and nav right here. And then I do have a list that you have to have for the menu. So it is in a little list. Here are my links right here. I haven't put the links in yet. Scroll on down. Here's the column. Notice that I just took out the columns that were in the W3 Schools layout and just left one of them in there. So it does have to have the row on there and the column. And then this right here, what you see, the H2 and the paragraph, that will be replaced with the image that I'm going to create in Photoshop and put in there. So that's the simple layout that I've designed. And then the CSS is a little more complicated, and I'm not going to try to go line by line through this. I'll just pick out a few of the important aspects. You'll see the header. So if you don't like that background color for the header up here that I used, let's see, this color right here, I'm going to leave it for this demonstration, but if you don't like it, that's where you change it right here. There's the columns, and instead of using, I think they use like 33% on W3 Schools, I'm just using 1, so I changed that to 100%. And then you scroll down here, you're going to get into some of the navigation. So here's where I chose the font for the navigation, and here's where the icon is displayed. So again, you have to make sure that you have the images and then the slash menu icon. And they use a PNG file here, which is generally acceptable, PNG, GIF, or JPEG for images. If it's anything outside of that, it may not work. And then they do have a hover on here, and then the UL, some of the styles, the LI, style, float left, inline block on there, and padding. Here's the color, and there's I took the text decoration, I just added this in as a separate CSS rule for a particular tag, in this case the A tag. So I just did the text decoration of none, so that takes off the underline. The H1 is not part of the navigation menu, that's just H1 style. That really doesn't need to be on there because I'm going to take off the header. I'm sorry, not the header, I'm going to take off the H1 on there, but you can leave it, it doesn't matter. And then you also begin to see these media queries on your CSS. And these are important because what this does is it tells the browser what to do when the screen is 600 pixels or less. So that's like a phone, if you, or smaller size, if you drag that down and it gets to 600, then what happens? And the column stays at 100% because we only have one, but this is where this is where if you had the 3 columns, then it would actually, this would stay at 100%. It's up at the top where it would be 33%, and then it would change to 100%, and that would display them in line for smaller ones if you do have multiple columns. And then here's some CSS that concerns the menu, what happens to the menu when the screen gets smaller. And that's pretty much it. There's a few other things on here I left that I probably don't need since we only have the 1 column on there right now. So that's it. So that's the code that you need to get started on this website. And then look for, I'd say I'll probably do this in 3 parts. So the next part of this tutorial will show you how to use Photoshop to incorporate some images into the site and make it look a lot better. And then the third part we'll talk about adding in your pages, the separate pages, and then incorporating some content into those pages as well. Alright, that's it for this tutorial.